Confessions of an ex-stripper.
Have you ever wondered where your choices can take you? Some decisions may seem harmless, but they carry a weight that we don't always see. It's scary to think that the paths we take could lead us to a destiny of eternal pain and suffering, especially when we ignore the warnings we receive. But what if I told you that there was a place where all of this became viscerally real? Where does every mistake, every act of rebellion, turn into visible, tangible torment? For years, I lived far from God. He believed that the world had more to offer than any spiritual promise. My life was built on momentary pleasures, easy choices, and a refusal to listen to the truth. But, like every sandcastle, the base gave way. I was confronted with something I never imagined. I have seen with my own eyes what is in store for those who ignore the voice of God. And today I want to share this experience with you. Perhaps you are struggling with doubts, feeling far from a true purpose. Maybe you're thinking that life is simply that, an endless cycle of mistakes, followed by an attempt to survive. I thought so too, but what I saw changed everything. There is a spiritual reality that many choose to ignore. It's cruel, it's intense, but it's the truth. And while many prefer to believe that hell is just a concept, I'm here to tell you, it is real, and I've been there. Imagine a place where every breath is filled with despair, where there is no relief, only screams and an endless sense of loss. I want you to imagine because that's exactly what I experienced. I saw souls begging for a second chance, but for them it was too late. The good news is that it isn't for you yet. And do you know the most surprising thing? Even in that place of darkness and torment, a powerful truth was revealed to me. A message that was not just for me, but for everyone who is willing to listen. Are you prepared to understand what is really at stake in your spiritual life? What I learned there is something that can help you see what God has in store for you, and what He is trying to save you from facing. Just open your heart and stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal could be the difference between living with purpose and getting lost in the distractions of the world. If you've made it this far, I want to extend a special invitation to you. Leave your prayer request in the comments. Whatever your struggle, your pain, or whatever weighs on your heart, write. Let's pray together. Prayer is a powerful weapon. It is our way of talking to God, of opening our hearts and seeking direction, strength, and peace. She is what connects us to the Father, even in the most difficult times. No matter the size of your problem, God is listening. And more than that, He is waiting for you to look for Him. Maybe you feel like you are far away, but the truth is that God has never left you. Prayer has the power to transform not only our lives, but also the environment around us. That's why I want to encourage you to take this step. Share what's on your heart, because we will be praying for you and with you. If this message touched your heart, don't forget to leave yours like in this video. This helps so that more people can hear this message and find the hope they so desperately need. And of course, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Here we talk about the truth, about the power of God, and how He can transform lives, including yours. Let's build a chain of prayer, faith, and hope together. You are not alone. And remember, today is the day to seek God. Shall we pray? My life seemed perfect to anyone looking in from the outside. I had what many considered success. Easy money, constant parties, and attention everywhere I went. It was as if I had built a reality where the rules were mine, where no one could tell me what was right or wrong. But what people didn't see, and what I never let on, was that inside, I was completely empty. Amid the noise of the clubs, the flashing lights, and the superficial laughter, the silence in my heart screamed louder. I always knew, deep down, that something was missing. But how to admit this? How could I accept that everything I thought was happiness was nothing more than a mask that I had put on myself? I had everything the world said I needed to be happy, but even so, there were nights when I cried alone. I wondered if what I was doing with my life made sense. Why, even though I had everything, I felt like I had nothing. The search for answers started early, when I was still a teenager, but was never directed to the right place. I thought that answers could be found in rebellion, in the freedom to break rules, to be whoever I wanted without caring about the consequences. At first, it was exciting. There was power in challenging everything and everyone, in telling the world that I didn't need God, religion, or limits. But as time passed, I realized that this feeling was like sand running through my hands. The more I tried to hold it, the more it disappeared. The years passed, and my life continued to revolve around this incessant search. Every choice seemed to push me further away from God, even though I tried to convince myself that He was never missed. The truth was different. I was afraid to face the possibility that I was wrong. Admitting this would be acknowledging that my life, the choices I made, and the path I followed were slowly destroying me. There were times when things got so dark that I began to question my own existence. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I didn't recognize. Who was that person? How did I get lost? There was a constant weight in my heart, something that told me my life couldn't go on like this. But instead of listening to that voice, I drowned it out. I fell deeper into a routine of excess, trying to fill a void that seemed to grow every day. It was at this time that I started to notice small signs, things that I had ignored before. It was as if God was trying to get my attention in many ways. A word said by someone, a piece of music that made me reflect, or even a disturbing dream. But I was stubborn. My pride told me that I was in control, that I didn't need anyone to save me. Still, there was something undeniable. I felt like I was walking towards a precipice. With every step I took, it seemed like the darkness around me grew thicker. And the more I ran from God, the clearer the truth I didn't want to face became. My heart was crying out for something the world could never offer me. I began to realize that what I called freedom was actually a prison. The choices that promised me happiness chained me to an endless cycle of frustration and pain. I tried to pretend that everything was fine, that my life was amazing, but the truth was that I felt dead inside. And this is where I want you to stop for a moment and reflect. How many times have you felt this way? How many times have you tried to fill the void with things that deep down you knew wouldn't last? I didn't know it at the time, but this feeling was the first sign that God was working in my life. He was showing me that without Him, there is no purpose, there is no true happiness. While all this was happening, something inside me began to change. The voice I tried to ignore became stronger, harder to silence. It was like my soul was being shaken, telling me I couldn't keep living this way. It was on this journey, full of mistakes, falls, and pride, that my heart began to understand what it meant to seek something bigger than myself. Looking back, I see that these moments of questioning were fundamental to what came next. They were the gateway to a transformation I never imagined possible. And do you know the most incredible thing? I wasn't alone, even when I thought I was. God was there, patiently waiting for me to seek Him. But for that to happen, I would have to face the most terrifying experience of my life. An experience that would open my eyes to truths that I didn't want to see. And you? Have you ever wondered what is missing in your life? Have you ever felt that despite everything you have, there is still a void that nothing seems to fill? If so, I want you to write that in the comments. Share with me. Because maybe, like me, you are closer to finding the answers than you think. It was in the midst of this inner turmoil that my life began to fall apart. But I still didn't realize that this was, in fact, the beginning of something much bigger. You know that moment when you feel like you've hit rock bottom, but you still don't have the strength to get out? That's exactly where I was. The life I had built so stubbornly, based on selfish choices and momentary pleasures, began to crumble. It was like every part of my world was being taken apart piece by piece, but I refused to understand why. I thought it was just bad luck, coincidence, or maybe the price to pay for living my way. But today I know that it wasn't random. It was God trying to wake me up. At that time, I couldn't see that what I called freedom was, in fact, slavery. The things I believed I controlled were actually controlling me. The search for acceptance, money, and recognition was insatiable. No matter how much I achieved, it was never enough. And yet, I held on to it like it was the only thing I had. My heart was trapped, chained by choices that I thought gave me power, but that were actually taking me further from God and closer to an abyss I didn't even know existed. I remember a specific night. It was one of those nights where, after all the partying and all the superficial glitz, I came home and the silence became deafening. The weight of everything I was ignoring seemed to fall on me with overwhelming force. I looked around and saw everything I had achieved. Money, expensive clothes, a luxurious apartment. But at the same time, I felt like I was surrounded by darkness. It was a feeling of emptiness so profound that it made me question whether life had any meaning. At that moment, something inside me began to scream, asking for help. It was a scream that I tried to ignore, but it only grew louder. The most interesting thing is that, even without understanding, I started to notice signs. It was like the universe was trying to send me messages. A word spoken by a stranger, a song that seemed to speak directly to me, or even an unsettling dream that made me wake up with tears in my eyes. I remember dreaming several times about a dark place, with voices in the distance that seemed to call me, but it wasn't a friendly call. It was something that made me wake up with my heart racing, with the feeling that I was being warned about something that I still didn't understand. At the time, I didn't have the courage to face what was happening. I did what I always did. I ignored it. I went back to my routine, occupied myself with work, parties, and everything else that could distract me from that feeling. But the problem with ignoring something so profound is that it won't go away. It grows. And the more I tried to run away, the more it felt like I was being pulled to face what was hiding inside me. Then, on a night that seemed like any other, something happened. It wasn't a grand event. It wasn't a dramatic moment like we see in movies. It was something simple, but it changed everything. I was alone in my room, looking at the ceiling, and I started crying. It was a cry that seemed to come from a place so deep that I didn't even know it existed. It was as if all the pain, all the emptiness, all the guilt and all the frustration accumulated over the years were exploding all at once. In that moment, for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to ask something I had always been afraid to face. God, are you there? It wasn't an elaborate prayer. It didn't even look like a prayer. It was more like an outburst, a desperate cry coming from the depths of my soul. And as strange as it may seem, it was at that moment that something inside me began to change. There was no audible voice, no extraordinary vision, but there was something, a peace that I couldn't explain took over my heart, even if for a few moments. It was as if God was saying, I am here. I always have been. From that moment on, something began to move inside me. It was as if a small light had been turned on in the darkness. I didn't know it at the time, but this would be the first of many times that I would feel God calling me. It was an invitation to leave that empty life and find something bigger. But like all changes, it wasn't easy. My pride and my fears were still there, fighting the idea that I needed something or someone other than myself. And you? Have you ever felt that feeling of being called, but can't explain exactly where or by whom? I want you to think about this for a moment. Maybe you are experiencing something similar, or maybe you know someone who is. If these words make sense to you, leave the phrase, I feel this call, in the comments or share what you have been going through. It is important that you know that you are not alone on this journey. As that little light began to shine within me, still shy and fragile, I felt like I was living between two worlds. On one side, there was the universe that I knew so well, full of choices that promised instant satisfaction, parties, money, recognition. It was a cycle of fleeting euphoria followed by increasing emptiness. On the other side, there was an unknown calling, something that I couldn't fully explain, but that grew every day inside me, like a seed beginning to sprout. It was something that made me feel, for the first time, that maybe there was a different path. Still, I resisted. The idea of abandoning everything I knew terrified me. My life, as empty as it was still familiar. How can I leave behind the things that, for so long, I used to fill the void? It was like trying to kick an addiction. No matter how much it hurt me, I kept holding on to it because I didn't know how to live any other way. I was afraid of what might happen if I decided to listen to that voice that insisted on calling me. Still, the signs continued to appear. They were everywhere, in words spoken by people I barely knew, in snippets of music that seemed to speak directly to me, in dreams I couldn't forget. One of them left a deep impression on me. In this dream, I was walking through a place that appeared to be a desert. The sky was gray, without sun, without light, and there was a silence so heavy that it was suffocating. I walked alone, aimlessly, until I saw a kind of door in the distance, a bright light coming through its cracks. My heart raced. Something inside me knew that light was the outlet I needed, but before I could reach it, something held me back. It was as if invisible chains were attached to my feet, preventing me from moving forward. I woke up with my heart racing, feeling as if the dream was more than a simple creation of my mind. That day, for the first time, I began to question whether the emptiness I felt was a reflection of something much bigger. Was my soul bound by invisible chains as in the dream? Had I allowed myself to be captured by choices that at first seemed harmless, but now kept me trapped in a cycle of pain and dissatisfaction? These questions began to consume me, and the more I thought about them, the more I felt like I was being confronted with a truth that I could no longer ignore. It was then that something started to change. Small events began to happen, almost as if they were orchestrated to force me to stop and reflect. One day, for example, I received a message from someone who hadn't spoken to me in years. It was an old friend who sent me a text saying that she felt in her heart the need to pray for me. That left me disconcerted. She didn't know anything about my current life, but it seemed like she was seeing directly into the mess I was trying to hide from everyone. It was as if God was using that message to remind me that He was watching me, even when I thought no one cared. Still, I remained hesitant. As much as the call was becoming clearer, I was still afraid of surrendering completely. There was a part of me that believed I wasn't worthy of saving, that I had already gone too far to deserve a second chance. How could God accept me after everything I've done? These doubts became a constant in my mind, a battle between guilt and hope. But the most incredible thing is that, even in the midst of all this resistance, God continued to move. It was as if He was patiently waiting for me, knowing that at the right time I would finally give in. And although I didn't know it at the time, this internal struggle was a sign that something was about to happen. I was being prepared for a transformation that would change my life in ways I could never have imagined. Now, as you listen to this, I want you to take a moment and reflect on your own life. Have you ever felt trapped? As if there were invisible chains preventing you from moving forward? Have you ever had moments when it felt like something was calling you, but you hesitated to respond out of fear or insecurity? If these words resonate with you, I want you to write in the comments the phrase, "I am ready for the light." Because sometimes, all we need is to take the first step, even without seeing the entire path. Leave this in the comments right now and let's go on this path of discovery together. As this internal battle continued, something inside me began to give way. It was as if the barriers I had built over the years were breaking down little by little. Every sign, every unexpected message, every moment of introspection seemed to be more intense than the last. And even though I didn't fully understand, I felt like something bigger was calling me. It was as if my soul, so long anesthetized by the weight of pride and the distractions of the world, was beginning to awaken to a spiritual reality that I had ignored for so long. In the midst of this process, I remember an episode that was a watershed moment. I was at home, alone, on a particularly quiet night. The silence, which had previously bothered me, seemed to be more oppressive than ever. It was as if, in that moment, all the noise I used to drown out my thoughts disappeared, leaving me face to face with a truth I didn't want to face. I sat on the floor with a heavy heart and allowed myself to do something I hadn't done in years. I closed my eyes and talked to God. It wasn't a formal prayer, or even something I planned. It was a raw outburst, a heartfelt conversation in which I simply said, "If the Lord is really there, show me. I don't know what else to do." What happened next is something I will never be able to fully explain in words. It wasn't something visible or audible, but it was palpable. It was as if a presence entered the room, filling every corner with something I can only describe as peace. A peace that I had never felt before. A peace that seemed to say that despite everything, I was not alone. My heart, which until then had felt weighed down by a lifetime of poor choices, began to feel lighter. And for the first time, I cried not out of sadness, but out of relief. But this moment of peace was quickly followed by something much more intense. As I lay there with my eyes closed, I began to feel pressure in my chest, as if something was being exposed. It was as if God was opening my heart, showing all the things I had buried, all the pain, the mistakes, the hurts, the wounds that I pretended didn't exist. It was like looking into a mirror and finally seeing all the scars I had accumulated over the years. I realized that behind all the pride and self-sufficiency facade, there was a deeply wounded soul crying out for healing. And it was at that moment that something happened. I started to remember all the choices I made, all the times I rejected the truth in the name of the freedom I thought I had. The memories came like a movie, each scene showing me how far I had strayed from God. But along with this avalanche of memories, there was something else. It was as if, in the midst of all these images, there was a clear message. I am still here. There is still time. This message kept echoing in my mind for days. There's still time. These words seemed to carry such a great weight, but at the same time, an indescribable hope. It was as if God was telling me that despite everything I had done, He was still willing to receive me, to forgive me, to give me another chance. But to do that, I needed to make a decision. I needed to choose to leave the place where I was, let go of the chains that held me back, and surrender completely to Him. This process was not easy. It wasn't like pressing a button and suddenly everything was resolved. Every day was a struggle. It was as if my soul was torn between fear of the unknown and hope for something new. But little by little, hope began to gain strength. Every prayer, every moment of reflection, every step toward God seemed like a victory, no matter how small. What struck me most during this period was the way things began to change around me. People who were previously part of my cycle began to move away, as if there was no more space for them in the new reality that was forming. At the same time, other people appeared. People who encouraged me, who spoke words of life, and who reminded me that I was not alone on this path. And that's exactly what I want you to understand. No matter how far you've gone, no matter how many wrong choices you've made, there's always a way back. God is not waiting for you to be perfect. He is waiting for you to take the first step. He is waiting for you to open your heart, for you to allow him to come in and do what only he can do. Transform your life from the inside out. Now I want you to reflect on this. Do you feel like there is something inside you that needs to be exposed, healed, restored? If so, write the phrase in the comments, "I want this peace." Because when you put your heart's desire into words, you are taking the first step in the right direction. Let's go on this journey together. As I continued to take steps on this new journey, a sense of urgency began to grow within me. It wasn't just a need for change, but a deep feeling that I was heading towards something that I didn't yet fully understand. But that was inevitable. It was as if each prayer, each moment of silence and reflection, was taking me deeper into a truth I had ignored for years. And in the process, I began to realize how much my life had been shaped by lies that I accepted as truth. These lies were not obvious. They were subtle, disguised as freedom, modern choices, and a lifestyle that society applauded. Things like live in the now, do what makes you happy, you don't owe anyone satisfaction seemed so harmless. And I believed them because they validated the choices I was making. But as time passed, I realized that these phrases were like traps, placing invisible shackles on my soul while making me believe I was free. This realization became even clearer one night when I sat down to try to organize my thoughts. I grabbed a notebook, something I hadn't done in years, and started writing. At first, it was difficult. It was like I didn't know where to start, but little by little, the words began to flow. I wrote about my choices, about the moments when I knew I was wrong but still kept going. I wrote about the people I hurt, the times I betrayed my own conscience, and all the justifications I used to erase the weight of those decisions. As I was writing, something incredible happened. It was as if a curtain was being opened before my eyes. For the first time, I was able to see clearly how every choice I made, every decision that seemed like just a detail, had led me to where I was. I saw the connections, the consequences, and the depth of the emptiness I had nurtured within myself. But the most impressive thing was not just seeing all of this, but realizing that, even so, I didn't feel condemned. I felt as if God was showing me all this not to judge me, but to set me free. This experience was a turning point. It was as if I was finally ready to face the chains that held me back, to face the fears, the guilt, and even the pride that prevented me from taking bolder steps on this new journey. And that's when the real fight began. Because the closer I got to God, the more I felt the resistance. It wasn't just an internal resistance, but something that seemed to come from outside, something that tried to pull me back into the darkness I was leaving behind. Resistance manifested itself in several forms. There were thoughts of doubt, painful memories that appeared out of nowhere, people who appeared with negative comments or trying to convince me that I was wasting my life. But worst of all were the restless nights, where I felt a spiritual battle going on around me. I knew something was trying to stop me from moving forward, trying to make me believe that I wasn't strong enough, that I wasn't worthy enough, that I couldn't go on. But in every moment of weakness, I clung to that peace I had felt in that first encounter with God. I remembered the message that echoed inside me. I am still here. There is still time. These words became my refuge, my strength, my reminder that I was not alone in this fight. And little by little, I began to realize that the resistance I felt was a sign that I was on the right path. Because if I wasn't, why would there be so much effort to stop me? And this is where I want you to stop and reflect. Have you ever felt this resistance in your life? Maybe you're trying to change, trying to get out of a cycle of choices that hurt you, trying to get closer to God. But it seems like the harder you try, the harder it gets. If this is happening to you, I want you to know that this is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're on the right path. Resistance is proof that something powerful is about to happen in your life. I want you to write in the comments, I feel this resistance, but I won't give up. Write this as a statement, as a reminder that you are not alone on this journey. Because just as I discovered, you will also see that there is a greater force at your side, supporting you, guiding you, and strengthening you to continue. And as you write, remember this. God never promised it would be easy, but He promised He would be with you every step of the way. And that makes all the difference. This struggle I was facing seemed endless. Every day, it was as if something new appeared to test my faith and determination. What I didn't understand at that moment was that this battle was necessary. She was shaping my heart, preparing me for something much greater. God was showing me that even when all seems lost, it is possible to find strength within ourselves that we didn't even know existed. But to do that, you had to trust. Truly trust, without reservations, without that fear of letting go of control that for so long trapped me in a life that was not the one God had planned for me. I began to realize that every resistance, every doubt, every fear that arose was an opportunity. It didn't seem that way at the time, of course. At that moment, all I wanted was for the pain and the struggle to end. But looking back, I see how God used each of these situations to show me something I needed to learn. He was teaching me to depend on Him, to let go of the pride that made me believe I could do everything on my own. I thought asking for help was a sign of weakness, but God was showing me that true strength comes when we recognize that we can't carry the weight of the world alone. One night, after a particularly difficult day, I was praying and asked, "Why is all this happening to me? Why is it so difficult?" And it was as if, in that moment, God responded with a clarity that I had never experienced before. The answer came not in audible words, but in a deep understanding that washed over me. It was as if God was saying, "I am strengthening you. Every battle you face is preparing you for something greater. Trust in me." This confidence did not come all at once. It was something I had to renew every day. Each morning, I had to decide that no matter what happened, I would trust. Sometimes that meant giving up things I thought were important. Other times, it meant facing fears I preferred to ignore. But with every step, I felt like God was with me, holding my hand and showing me the way. I began to understand what it means to live by faith. It's not an easy thing. It's not something comfortable. Living by faith means walking even when you can't see the next step. It means believing that God has a plan for you, even when everything around you seems to be falling apart. And more than anything, it means surrendering completely, surrendering every part of your life to Him. This surrender was one of the most difficult, and at the same time, most freeing moments of my life. I remember clearly when I realized I was trying to hold on to things that I needed to let go of. I was holding on to hurts, fears, insecurities, and even dreams that weren't God's dreams for me. Letting it all out was painful. It was like giving up parts of myself. But as I let go, I felt something incredible happening. It was as if, by releasing these things, I was making space for God to put in something new, something better, something I didn't even know I needed. One of the hardest things to let go of was control. I've always been a person who needed to have everything planned, everything under control. The idea of trusting God to guide my life was scary, but I slowly began to realize that when I tried to control everything, I was actually limiting what God could do for me. I was holding on to a small vision while God had something so much bigger planned. And you know what's most incredible? When I finally surrendered everything to Him, things began to change in ways I could never have imagined. It was not an immediate process, nor was it easy. But little by little, I began to see how God was transforming my life. He was restoring areas that I thought were lost forever. He was healing wounds I didn't even know I had. He was showing me that when we trust Him, even the most difficult situations can be used for our good. Now I want to ask you, what are you holding? What is stopping you from completely surrendering to God? It could be fear, pride, pain, or even the desire to have everything under control. Whatever it is, I want to encourage you to let go. Write in the comments, "I choose to trust." Make that your statement, because when you choose to trust God, you make room for Him to do the impossible in your life. Remember, faith is not the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite fear. And God is with you, ready to guide you in every step of this journey. As time went by, the trust I was building in God began to reveal a new dimension of my life. It was as if I was learning to see everything from a different perspective, deeper, more connected with something eternal. But at the same time, it was a process full of challenges, because true trust requires you to let go of things that, for years, defined who you were. What no one told me was that this abandonment was not just physical, but spiritual and emotional. I needed to let go of the lies that shaped my view of the world, those that made me believe that success and happiness were tied to fleeting things, and that I didn't need anyone other than myself. It was then that I began to realize the difference between freedom and slavery. For so long, I confused freedom with the idea of living without limits, without responsibilities. I believed that by following my desires, I was being free. But the truth was different. I was trapped in a cycle of choices that took me away from who God wanted me to be. Every decision that seemed to bring joy ended up creating yet another invisible shackle. It's strange to think that something that seems so liberating can, in the end, be the most oppressive prison. This realization became even stronger when I began to confront my own thought patterns. I realized how I had normalized things that were destructive to me. Toxic relationships, self-destructive behaviors, decisions based solely on impulses. All of this was part of a mindset that I considered normal, because that's what the world told me was normal. It was only when I began to renew my mind with the Word of God that I realized how far I was from the truth. The Bible talks about how we are transformed by the renewing of our minds. At first, I didn't understand what this meant, but as I delved deeper into this spiritual journey, I began to realize that this transformation wasn't something that happened all at once. It was an ongoing process, which required patience, persistence, and above all, honesty. I needed to be honest with myself about the areas of my life that were broken, about the habits I was feeding, and about the voices I was allowing to influence my decisions. One of the hardest things was learning to filter these voices. For so long, I listened to opinions that had nothing to do with the truth, friendships that encouraged me to continue on the wrong path, advice that seemed good on the surface, but deep down only took me away from God. I realized I needed to make a decision. Either I continued to allow these voices to shape my life, or I surrounded myself with people and influences that would bring me closer to God's purpose. This choice was not easy. Often, it meant walking away from people I loved, but who weren't aligned with the new direction I was heading. It was painful, because in a way, it was like giving up parts of myself, an identity that I had built over the years. But at the same time, it was liberating, because by letting go of these connections that were dragging me down, I began to make space for healthy relationships that built me up, that inspired me to grow. Another thing that started to change was the way I saw my past. Before, I carried great shame about the choices I made. I avoided thinking about it because every memory seemed to be a reminder of how far I had come from who I wanted to be. But little by little, God began to show me that my past was not something to be avoided or erased. On the contrary, He wanted to use all of this to transform me, and more than that, to impact other people. I began to realize that my testimony had a purpose. It wasn't just about me, but about what God could do through me. Every mistake, every pain, every moment of despair was being redeemed in a way I never imagined possible. It was as if God was taking all the broken pieces of my life and putting together something new, something beautiful, something that had a meaning far greater than I could comprehend. And that's exactly what I want to share with you now. If you feel like your past is a weight that stops you from moving forward, I want you to know that God can use it in ways you can't even imagine. No matter what you've done, no matter how distant you feel, God specializes in turning broken stories into powerful testimonies. I want you to reflect on this for a moment. What are the things from your past that you still carry as a burden? What are the memories that you avoid, but that continue to haunt you? I want to encourage you to turn this over to God. Write in the comments, "I surrender my past into God's hands." Make it a statement, because when you give Him all of who you are, including the parts you'd like to forget, He can do something extraordinary with it. And remember, your past does not define your future. God is the one who has the last word over your life. As I delved deeper and deeper into this spiritual transformation, I began to understand that it wasn't just about letting go of the past, but about allowing God to shape my future. What seemed impossible before was now starting to become real. It wasn't just a change in behavior, but a transformation in the most intimate part of my being. God wasn't just interested in my actions. He was interested in my heart, in the deepest motivations, in the places I was afraid to access myself. And as I took small steps in that direction, something extraordinary began to happen. The feeling of freedom I had been searching for my entire life finally started to make sense. This freedom was completely different from what I had known until then. Before, freedom meant doing what I wanted, when I wanted, without caring about the consequences. But now I realized that true freedom came from being in alignment with the purpose God had for my life. It was a freedom that did not depend on external circumstances, material things, or the approval of other people. It was a freedom that came from knowing that no matter what happened, I was safe in God's hands. This security does not mean that everything is perfect. On the contrary, many challenges continued to arise, but now there was a difference. I knew I wasn't alone. There was a greater force sustaining me, guiding me and showing me that, even in the most difficult moments, there was purpose. God began to teach me to see problems in a different way. What once seemed unbearable was now seen as an opportunity for growth, a chance to depend even more on Him. One thing that stood out during this process was the way God began to show me that everything I experienced had a greater meaning. Every pain, every regret, every battle I faced was part of a bigger story He was writing. And you know what's most incredible? This story wasn't just about me. It was about all the people who, in some way, would be impacted by what God was doing in my life. I realized that my testimony was not just a personal narrative, but a powerful tool for touching other lives. This realization brought a weight of responsibility, but also immense joy. God was calling me to be light in the midst of darkness, to use everything I experienced as a channel of hope, of restoration, of reconciliation. This made me see that often the things we face are not just for our learning, but so that we can be instruments in God's hands to help other people find the same path. I started to notice this very clearly in conversations with people around me. Friends who had previously left me began to return, curious to understand what was happening to me. People I would never have imagined asked me for advice, shared their pain, and asked for help in dealing with situations that they also didn't understand. That's when I realized that God was opening doors, creating opportunities for me to share what He was doing in my life. But this also required courage. Sharing my testimony meant exposing myself, admitting mistakes, facing judgment. There were times when I wondered if I was really ready for this, if I could really handle the consequences. But with every doubt, God reminded me that my strength did not come from myself, but from Him. He was showing me that as long as I was willing to obey and trust, He would take care of the rest. This obedience was one of the biggest challenges, because it required me to give up not only my pride, but also my fear of failure. It was a daily exercise in remembering that God does not require perfection, but rather a willing heart. Every time I said yes to Him, something new happened. It wasn't always visible, but it was tangible. I felt my faith being strengthened, my courage being renewed, my vision being expanded. One of the things that most marked this period was the discovery of the power of intercessory prayer. I began to pray not just for my own needs, but for those around me, for those who were lost like I once was. And you know what's amazing? Each prayer seemed to open doors, break chains, bring light where there was once darkness. God began to show me that prayer was not just a tool for communicating with Him, but a powerful weapon for bringing about transformation. Now, I want you to think about your own journey. What is God calling you to do? What are the areas of your life where you feel you need to trust Him more? Maybe it's the fear of sharing your story, the fear of exposing yourself, or the doubt if you're really ready to take the next step. I want to encourage you to take this step today. Write in the comments, "I trust in God's purpose for my life." Declare it as an act of faith, as a way of saying you are ready to embrace what God has for you. Because the truth is that the purpose God has for you is greater than you can imagine. He not only wants to restore you, but also to use your life to impact the world in ways you never thought possible. As I continued to say yes to God's purpose for my life, I began to experience something I never thought possible: true transformation. Not a superficial change, the kind that happens out of obligation or external pressure, but something that came from the inside out. It was as if every part of me that had previously been dormant began to come to life. God was touching the deepest areas of my heart, those that I hid even from myself, and bringing to the surface everything that needed to be healed. He was teaching me that genuine transformation doesn't happen when we try to fix things on our own, but when we surrender everything to Him and allow His grace to work within us. It was a long process, painful at many times, but extremely necessary. I needed to confront things that for a long time I preferred to ignore. Hurts I carried since childhood, words I heard that shaped the way I saw myself, choices I made out of fear of not being accepted. All of this came to light, but not as a burden or condemnation. Rather, God was showing me that these things needed to be exposed so they could be healed. And for the first time, I understood what it means to truly forgive, not just others, but also myself. The freedom that came with this forgiveness was something I cannot fully describe. It was as if a gigantic weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I realized that for so long, I lived trapped in resentments that prevented me from moving forward. Forgiveness was not a gift I gave to those who hurt me, but a gift God gave me, freeing my soul to live fully. And maybe you, who are watching right now, know exactly what I'm saying. Maybe you're also carrying something that seems impossible to leave behind. I want you to know that God can give you the strength you need to forgive. It is something that begins in your heart, with a simple act of decision, and that God makes it blossom until it becomes complete freedom. Meanwhile, God also began to open my eyes to see the lies that had stolen my identity for so long. I believed that I needed to be perfect to be loved, that I needed to prove myself to be accepted. But God showed me that His love does not depend on who I am or what I do. He loves me because that is His essence, because He created me with a purpose and sees in me something that I couldn't see myself. This revelation was liberating. For the first time, I could rest in the fact that God's love is not conditional. He is constant, unchanging, and sufficient. This realization completely changed the way I saw life. I no longer needed to chase validation, because I knew I was already accepted by the Creator of the universe. This security gave me the courage to face fears that previously paralyzed me, to step out of my comfort zone and start living according to the purpose that God had placed in my heart. And you know what's most incredible? The more I walked in that direction, the more I saw how God used my story, my failures, and even my moments of weakness to impact other people. It was as if He was taking the pieces of my life and transforming them into something beautiful and purposeful. It was at this point that I began to understand the true meaning of being an instrument in God's hands. He does not choose the strongest, the most qualified, or the most perfect. He chooses the willing. And when you are willing to obey and trust, He does extraordinary things. It takes you to places you never imagined, connects you with people who need exactly what you have to offer. And it all starts with a simple yes. A yes that may seem small, but carries eternal weight. But it is important to say that, even at this point, the struggles did not disappear. The difference was that now I knew where to draw strength. Whenever I felt fear or doubt, I ran to God in prayer. He became my refuge, my fortress, my inexhaustible source of peace. And that's what I want you to understand today. No matter how big the battle you're facing, God is bigger. He is bigger than your fears, bigger than your mistakes, bigger than anything that tries to keep you away from Him. All you have to do is search. Search with an open heart, with sincerity, without fear of being vulnerable. Now I want you to stop for a moment and reflect on your own life. Is there something you know you need to give to God? Maybe it's a fear, an insecurity, or even a dream that you've been holding onto so tightly that you forgot to ask if it's really what God wants for you. I want to encourage you to take this step today. Write in the comments, "I say yes to God's purpose." Write this as a declaration, a commitment that you are willing to follow His plan, even if you don't know exactly where it will take you. Because believe me, God's plans for your life are greater than you can imagine. He sees what you don't see, knows what you don't know, and is working on your behalf, even in the moments when everything seems to be at a standstill. Trust Him. Give Him every part of you and see what He can do. If you've made it this far, it means that this message has touched your heart in some way. Maybe she brought to light something that you needed to hear, something that God had already been saying to your spirit, but that for some reason you hadn't yet listened to. I want to invite you now to reflect on everything we shared in this video and how God may be using these words to speak directly to you. How has this message impacted your life? I want to know how the Holy Spirit acted as you listened to each part of this story. Maybe it was a specific word that touched your soul, or maybe it was the testimony that God transforms even the most broken stories into something glorious. Comment below, "I felt God's voice in this video," and share what God spoke to your heart. Not only can your comment be a response to what God is doing in your life, but it can also be a blessing to others who are reading and seeking the same transformation. Furthermore, I want to remind you that this journey does not have to be lived alone. Here on this channel, you are part of a family, a community of people who are seeking to live according to God's purpose. Each video we prepare is made with the aim of inspiring you, strengthening you, and bringing you closer to a life full of God's presence. And that's why I want to invite you right now to subscribe to the channel. This way, you guarantee that you will continue to receive transformative content, messages that touch the heart, and testimonies that show the power of God in action. And if you felt that this message needs to reach more lives, leave your like in this video. It may seem like a small gesture, but it has a huge impact because it helps spread this message to other people who also need to hear about God's love and purpose. Each like is like a seed you plant, helping to bring hope to more and more hearts. And before finishing, I want to make one last request. Take a few minutes to watch the next video that is appearing on the screen. He is part of this journey we are building together, and I am sure he will also speak deeply to you. Often, a message completes what God began to plant in our hearts, and it is no coincidence that you arrived here today. May God powerfully bless your life. May He strengthen you in every area where you need help, and may He continue to guide you along the path He has prepared for you. Always remember that you are loved, that you have a purpose, and that God has never given up on you. Thank you very much for watching until the end, for opening your heart, and for being part of this mission. See you in the next video.